Some doors once opened can never truly be shut. My name is Elias Vance. I've spent the better part of my adult life chasing shadows, dissecting whispers, trying to understand what lies beyond the veil of our known reality. Most people think of scientists as detached, rational minds, but I can tell you, when you're standing at the precipice of the unknown, logic starts to feel like a flimsy shield. I was a key member of Project Ether, an endeavor shrouded in secrecy, located deep within a secluded research facility miles from anywhere, where the hum of high-frequency generators was the only constant companion. Our grand ambition, to touch the very fabric of existence, to bridge the impossible gulfs between dimensions, to unlock realities that whispered just beyond our perception. We believed we could harness unimaginable forms of energy, explore untapped realms of physics, even chart pathways to worlds previously unreachable. Dr. Eris Thorne, our lead, possessed a mind like a razor, sharp and unyielding, driven by an almost spiritual hunger for knowledge. She guided us with a firm, precise hand, her gaze often lost in the intricate schematics that plastered the walls of our observation rooms. Then there was Dr. Kelvin Finch, our brilliant lead physicist. Kelvin was the architect of the theoretical framework that underpinned every bolt and wire of our colossal machinery. He was a man of quiet intensity, often seen murmuring calculations to himself, his fingers tracing invisible equations in the air. Lena Petrova, a sharp junior researcher, brought youthful vigor and a fresh perspective, her quick wit often cutting through the dense scientific jargon that filled our days. Together we were a formidable team, working tirelessly, almost religiously, to make our audacious vision a reality. The core objective of Project Ether was deceptively simple: to forge a controlled, temporary link between our dimension and others that, according to our theories, existed in parallel. We speculated that such a connection could unveil hidden aspects of physics, forces currently beyond our grasp, concepts that could rewrite every textbook. Understanding these aspects, we dreamed, would unlock unimaginable technological advancements, offering answers to profound questions about the very nature of existence itself. Of course, the sheer scale of the project carried immense risks. The machinery we had meticulously constructed was both complex and terrifyingly powerful, designed to operate at energy levels never before harnessed in a controlled environment. But in our collective hubris, we believed the potential rewards far outweighed any risks. We were wrong. The day it happened is seared into my memory with a clarity that time refuses to dull. The air in the facility thrummed with a nervous energy, the deep bass hum of the generators, a prelude to something monumental. Today was the day we would push the boundaries of physics, a groundbreaking experiment that promised to redefine our understanding of the cosmos. Eris, her dark hair pulled back severely, scanned the control panels, her eyes, sharp even behind her glasses, missing nothing. "Are we all set?" she asked, her voice calm, a stark contrast to the coiled tension in the room. "We are," I replied, a tremor in my own voice betraying the mix of exhilarating excitement and icy apprehension churning in my gut. Kelvin, usually lost in his own world of numbers, nodded solemnly. "The calculations are confirmed, the machinery primed. We're ready." We gathered around the central console, a monolithic slab of polished chrome and blinking lights. Eris, her finger hesitating for only a fraction of a second, pressed the activation button. Then the world changed. A sound unlike anything I had ever heard tore through the room, a sharp, tearing crack, like a cosmic fabric being ripped apart. The colossal machinery, usually a symphony of precise operations, sputtered violently, its hum dissolving into a chaotic cascade of groans and shrieks. "What was that?" Kelvin's voice was a ragged whisper, disbelief warring with a sudden, dawning panic. Eris, her eyes frantically scanning the flickering readouts, replied, "I'm not sure. Something's wrong, terribly wrong." The entire room shuddered, a profound tremor that felt as though an invisible, immense fist had slammed into the very foundation of the facility. Alarms began to wail, a shrill, piercing shriek that assaulted our ears. Red lights flashed, painting the sterile environment in an apocalyptic glow, and the facility's automated security system kicked into overdrive. Heavy steel doors slammed shut, sealing us in, trapping us within our own engineered nightmare. "What's happening?" Lena cried out, her face pale, her hands trembling as she clutched a data pad. "I don't know," Eris replied, her voice strained but still retaining that characteristic steadiness, "but we need to find out. Everyone, stay calm." Our eyes were drawn, as if by an irresistible magnetic force, to the central monitor. And there it was, not a clean, theoretical projection, but a reality too terrifying to comprehend. A portal. It pulsed with an unnatural, sickly luminescence, shimmering and swirling, a vortex of corrupted light and profound darkness. We had opened a door to another dimension. This portal, unlike anything we had ever conceived, hung suspended in the very heart of our experimental chamber. It defied all logical understanding, a pulsating, shimmering gateway that was not merely a hole or a doorway, but a tear, a monstrous, gaping wound in the very fabric of reality itself. The edges of this anomaly were indistinct, constantly in motion, like a liquid that was simultaneously viscous and ethereal, a cosmic oil slick dissolving into nothingness. The center of the portal was a void, a bottomless darkness that seemed to pull at the very essence of what surrounded it, a hungry emptiness that drew the eye and held it captive. Gazing into it was like staring into the abyss itself, a sensation both hypnotizing and utterly terrifying. Around the portal, the very air seemed distorted, as though the atoms themselves were bending and twisting in response to the anomaly we had unwittingly unleashed. Light near it fractured and scattered, creating a surreal and deeply disorienting effect, painting the chamber in shifting, impossible hues. The sounds emanating from the portal were equally unsettling. There were whispers, countless voices from some unspeakable otherworld, intertwined with guttural groans and chilling screeches that defied any description I could conjure. "Is that?" Kelvin trailed off, his hand shaking as he pointed towards the shimmering maw. "Yes," Eris confirmed, her voice tight, strained. "We've accidentally opened a portal to another dimension." The weight of her words settled on us, a crushing realization of the magnitude of our error. "What do we do now?" I asked, my voice raw, the words catching in my throat. "We need to contain this," Eris answered, her mind already racing through solutions, that formidable intellect cutting through the terror. "We can't let anything get through." But as if on cue, the strange noises emanating from the portal intensified groans that resonated deep in our bones, screeches that tore at our sanity, sounds that were undeniably, horrifyingly otherworldly. We all stared transfixed as shapes began to coalesce, to move in the shadows behind the shimmering surface. "Is something coming through?" Lena whispered, her voice trembling on the verge of breaking. "It seems so," Eris replied, her face now ashen. "We need to get to the control room and initiate lockdown. It's the only way to contain whatever's coming through." We hurried through the hallways of the facility, our footsteps echoing loudly in the sudden, eerie silence of the lockdown. We were trapped now with whatever horrors we had set free. As we ran, the building itself seemed to warp and change, as if infected by the portal's insidious energy. The once clean and orderly hallways were now disheveled, distorted, walls bowing, floors rippling. The air grew thick, heavy with a smell that was both metallic and something else, something deeply, profoundly other, like ancient dust mixed with stale blood. It clung to the back of our throats, making us cough and gag. The fluorescent lights flickered erratically, casting a strobing effect that played cruel tricks on our eyes. Shadows danced and swayed, taking on shapes that were both unnervingly familiar and terrifyingly alien. I heard Lena cry out as something moved in the periphery of our vision, a fleeting form that vanished the instant we turned to look. "What was that?" she gasped, her face sickly pale. "I don't know," Kelvin answered, his voice a tremor, "but we need to keep moving." The creature sounds grew closer now, haunting wails and guttural growls that sent ice down our spines. We caught fleeting glimpses of them through shattered windows and cracks in doors, twisted limbs, shifting shapes, and eyes that watched us with an intelligence we couldn't fathom, a predatory cunning that chilled us to the bone. "We're almost there," Eris called out, her voice a surprising bastion of determination that somehow pushed us forward. "Stay close, stay quiet." We passed laboratories filled with overturned equipment and shattered glass. Papers were scattered everywhere, doors hung off their hinges, and the walls bore deep, savage scratches and strange, viscous marks. Finally, we reached the main control room. The images on the monitors were almost impossible to comprehend, a kaleidoscope of unimaginable horrors spewing forth from the portal. Creatures like twisted parodies of life slithered and crawled through the facility. The screens showed multiple angles, each revealing a different terror that seemed to defy every law of biology and physics. One creature appeared as a writhing mass of tentacles, each one tipped with what looked like a razor-sharp claw. Its central body pulsed and waved as though it were a monstrous, living heart, its movement both graceful and grotesque. Another seemed to be made entirely of shadows, a dark, formless entity that moved like smoke, its very essence a contradiction, both solid and ethereal. Its eyes, if they could be called that, were glowing red orbs that seemed to peer into my very soul. Yet another was a twisted fusion of insect and reptile, its exoskeleton glistening with a sickly green hue, its many legs clicking and clattering as it moved. Its jaws snapped open and closed, revealing rows of jagged teeth, and its eyes were a cold, unfeeling black, devoid of any recognizable emotion. One more creature was particularly horrifying, a terrifying combination of human and beast. Its face was a distorted mask of agony, its limbs elongated and bent at unnatural angles. It moved with a jerking, twitching motion, as if every step was a torment, its cries a chilling sound of profound pain and despair. The creature's movements were erratic and unpredictable. Some seemed to be exploring, probing the environment, while others appeared to be hunting, their senses attuned to something we could not perceive. Kelvin stumbled back from the monitors, his face ashen, a ghost of the composed scientist he had been just hours ago. "This can't be real," he murmured, disbelief warring with terror in his voice. Lena was frozen, her eyes fixed on a particularly gruesome creature that seemed to be a living tapestry of scales, tentacles, and teeth. "What are they?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Aris was the first to regain her composure, tearing her eyes away from the screens and looking at the rest of us. "We need to focus," she said, her voice shaking but resolute. "These creatures are here, they are real, and we have to deal with them." I couldn't pull my eyes away from the horrific images. The creatures moved with an eerie, intelligent purpose, their forms constantly changing and morphing into new nightmares. Some had eyes that seemed to stare directly into the camera, acknowledging our presence. "I've never seen anything like this," I finally managed to say, my voice hoarse. "They're like nightmares come to life." "We have to figure out what they are, where they came from," Kelvin insisted, moving closer to the screens, his scientific curiosity, for a brief moment, overtaking his fear. "Maybe there's a way to stop them." "Stop them," Lena cried, finally tearing her eyes away from the screens, a fresh wave of panic washing over her. "How can we stop something like that?" "We have to try," Aris said, her voice firm, injecting a desperate resolve into the terrified room. "We open this door, it's our responsibility to close it." "But how?" I asked, a rising sense of panic tightening my chest. "We don't even know what we're dealing with." "We'll figure it out," Kelvin said, his eyes scanning the monitors, analyzing the grotesque forms of the creatures. But even as he spoke, we could all see the flicker of profound doubt in his eyes. As we continued to watch, one of the creatures looked directly into the camera, its eyes locking onto ours, and we all felt a chill of absolute dread run down our spines. It was as if it saw us, knew us, and understood exactly what we had done. Our urgent argument was cut short by a sudden, jarring noise, a scraping, a dragging, then a heavy thud that sent chills down our spines. The creatures were getting closer. Their unnatural movements reverberated through the very structure of the hallways. "We need to move," Aris said, urgency back in her voice. Now, her words snapped us back into action, and we hurried through the twisted hallways once again, our minds reeling from the horrors we'd witnessed. As we navigated the dimly lit corridors, the distant, unsettling sounds of the creatures echoed behind us, growing fainter but never completely fading away. The flickering fluorescent lights cast a ghostly, shifting illumination over everything, giving the stark walls and cold tile floors an unsettling, almost otherworldly quality. We passed labs filled with overturned equipment and scattered papers, the wreckage a testament to the chaos unleashed. Our footsteps sounded loud and hollow, a frantic rhythm in the oppressive quiet, as we continued our desperate, desperate search for a way out. The sound of dripping water and the dying groans of machinery added to the eerie, desolate atmosphere. We came to a seemingly dead-end hallway, lined with tall shelves holding old equipment and forgotten boxes. It was a storage area, long neglected, thick with dust and the smell of disuse. Kelvin immediately began rummaging through the shelves, his movements quick and purposeful. "What are you doing?" Lena asked, her voice laced with anxiety. "Maybe there's something useful here," Kelvin replied, his voice muffled as he reached deep into the recesses of a shelf. Then he stopped, his hand frozen in place, his body tense. "Wait a minute," he muttered, his voice filled with a strange confusion. "What is it?" I asked, moving closer, peering over his shoulder. "I think there's something behind this shelf," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Help me move it." We all pitched in, pushing and pulling at the heavy metal shelf. It gave way with a sudden jerk, scraping loudly on the floor, revealing a hidden door tucked away behind it. The door was old, weathered, with peeling paint and a rusty handle, clearly untouched for years, perhaps decades. "What the?" Eris's voice trailed off, her eyes wide with shock. Kelvin reached out, his fingers brushing the cold metal, and turned the handle. The door creaked open, revealing a deeper darkness. The hidden room felt like a step back in time. Its walls were lined with old wooden shelves, packed with thick binders, dusty folders, and stacks of yellowed papers. The air was stale and musty, thick with the scent of aging documents and the faint trace of forgotten chemicals. Old-fashioned computers, their screens dark and lifeless, sat on rickety tables, covered with a fine, undisturbed layer of dust. The room was lit by a single, flickering bulb, casting an unsteady, dim light that only intensified the mysterious and forgotten ambience of the place. In the center of the room, a large wooden table was cluttered with scattered notes, intricate maps, and complex diagrams, along with old coffee mugs and pens. "This place hasn't been used in years," Kelvin said, his voice filled with a profound awe. "What is all this?" Lena asked, picking up a folder and flipping it open, her expression a mix of curiosity and dread. I watched as Kelvin carefully opened a binder, his eyes scanning the faded text. "These are project notes," he murmured, his voice tinged with disbelief. "It looks like a series of experiments on interdimensional travel. They were trying to bridge our world with another." Lena picked up a stack of papers, her eyes widening as she read. "Listen to this," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Project Chronos, a groundbreaking initiative to explore and harness the energies of alternate dimensions. Objective: to create a controlled gateway for study and potential utilization of interdimensional resources." Eris's eyes widened even further, and she snatched a folder filled with faded photographs. "Look at these," she exclaimed, showing us images of strange, complex machinery and intricate diagrams. "These are the blueprints for the portal we activated. They knew exactly what they were doing. This wasn't an accident." We continued to search, uncovering more and more about Project Chronos. There were letters between scientists and government officials discussing funding, ethics, and the potential, terrifying risks. I found a journal filled with handwritten notes, the ink faded but still legible. The entries described initial successes, the excitement of discovery, but also growing concerns and unexpected setbacks. The last entry was chilling, a desperate, almost insane plea for help, an acknowledgement that something had gone terribly, irrevocably wrong. "The creatures," Kelvin said, his voice cracking as he read a detailed report on the entities from the other dimension. "They knew about them, they studied them, they thought they could control them." We pieced together a narrative that was both fascinating and utterly horrifying. Project Chronos was a top-secret initiative, a bold, reckless attempt to explore the unknown. We were being used. The realization hit me hard, a cold knot in my stomach. This experiment was never just about physics. It was about cleaning up someone else's mess, or perhaps repeating their folly. "We have to keep moving," Eris urged, pulling us away from the shocking revelation, her mind already shifting back to survival. "We'll figure it out later. Right now we need to escape. We need to head to the East Wing," Kelvin said, his voice strained, a new resolve in his eyes. "I think there's an emergency exit there." We moved cautiously, our footsteps muffled, our breath shallow. The air was thick with tension and raw fear. The distant sounds of the creatures were a constant, chilling reminder of the unimaginable danger we were in. We headed north through a dimly lit corridor. The walls were scarred with deep claw marks, gouged into the metal surface. The pervasive smell of decay hung in the air, a disturbing undercurrent that added to the overall sense of dread. A faint growl echoed in the distance, a sound that was both inhuman and unsettlingly close. We froze, our hearts pounding, our bodies tense, every nerve screaming. We listened, ears straining, every sense heightened to an unbearable degree. The growl faded, but the terror remained, a cold, unshakable chill that settled deep in our bones. "Did you hear that?" Eris whispered, her eyes wide with terror, her face pale. Her voice was a mere breath, but it carried the crushing weight of our collective fear. We nodded, unable to speak, our throats dry, our minds racing with dread. The sound had been a warning, a stark reminder that we were not alone, that the creatures were always close, always watching, always waiting. We moved on, our footsteps careful and measured, our eyes scanning every shadow, our ears tuned to the slightest sound. We turned left into an eastward passage, the corridor narrow and the ceiling low. The passage seemed to stretch on forever, an endless tunnel into the heart of the nightmare. As we moved through the eastward passage, the growls returned, fainter now, but still present, still haunting, still a promise of impending doom. We quickened our pace, a desperate scramble against the encroaching horror. The passage led us to a heavy metal door, its surface cold and unyielding. We paused, a collective breath held. What horrors lay beyond this final barrier? With a shared, unspoken resolve, we opened the door. Just as we stepped through the heavy metal door, a guttural screech pierced the air, a sound that sent a jolt of pure terror through every fiber of our being. We scrambled into the room, looking frantically for cover, our eyes darting, searching for any semblance of safety. "What is that?" Kelvin gasped, his face ashen, his eyes wild with raw fear. "We can't stay here," Eris replied, her voice trembling but resolute. "We need to find somewhere to hide now." The room was filled with machinery and lab equipment, tables strewn with tools and notes, a typical research space now turned into a tomb. We hurried to the back, finding a small alcove hidden behind a large cabinet. We squeezed in, pressing ourselves against the cold metal, pulling the cabinet slightly to conceal our presence, barely daring to breathe. The screeching grew louder, closer, accompanied by a wet, slithering, scraping sound that defied description, a sound of unimaginable weight and texture. We held our breath, our bodies pressed close, our eyes locked on the narrow opening between the cabinet and the wall, praying we wouldn't be seen. The creature entered the room. Its form was a grotesque mockery of life, its body a writhing mass of elongated limbs and tendrils, each movement a sickening ripple of muscle and bone. Its head was a twisted amalgamation of too many eyes and too many mouths, all working in a chaotic, unholy symphony. It moved with a disturbing grace that belied its horrific appearance, its movements fluid and deliberate as it explored the room. Its many eyes, glowing faintly in the dim light, scanned every surface, its numerous mouths tasting the very air, testing for our presence. It came close to our hiding spot, so close that we could smell its foul, acrid stench, a smell of decay and something else, something utterly alien. We could hear the wet, slithering sound of its movement, the soft click of its claws on the floor, each sound a hammer blow to our terrified hearts. We dared not breathe, our hearts pounding in our chests, our minds screaming for escape, for a chance to simply vanish. The creature lingered, its senses probing, its instincts sharp, but after what felt like an eternity, it moved on, its attention drawn elsewhere, a terrifying stroke of luck. We waited, our bodies frozen, our ears straining for any sign of its departure. Minutes passed, each one an agony of suspense and fear. Finally, the sounds faded, the room fell silent, and we dared to breathe again, gasping for air that felt thick and heavy. "We need to move," Eris whispered, her voice barely audible, a fragile thread of determination. "We can't stay here." We nodded, our bodies stiff, our minds still reeling from the close encounter, the vivid, horrifying image of the creature seared into our memories. We carefully moved the cabinet, peering into the room, our senses on high alert. The creature was gone, but its presence lingered, a palpable threat that hung in the air. We stepped out of our hiding spot, once we were certain the creature had moved on, and gathered around a nearby table. The chilling reality of our situation was sinking in, and we knew we couldn't just keep running and hiding. We needed a plan. "We can't just leave," Kelvin said, his voice firm, a flicker of his scientific resolve returning. "We have to close the portal. It's the only way to stop these things from coming through." "We don't even know how to do that," I replied, my voice trembling with frustration and fear. "We barely understand what we've done, let alone how to undo it." "We have to try," Eris insisted, her eyes filled with a fierce determination. "We can't just run away. We have to fix this." We spent the next several minutes discussing our options, poring over the salvaged notes and schematics from Project Chronos, trying to piece together a way to close the portal, to seal the breach we had so carelessly torn in reality. "We'll need to go back to the lab," Kelvin finally said, his voice filled with the authority of absolute conviction. "That's where the main equipment is, where the portal was opened. We'll have to reverse the process, undo what we've done." The plan was simple in theory, a horrifyingly complex task in execution. We would have to navigate the twisted, creature-infested hallways, avoid untold horrors, and somehow find a way to manipulate the very forces of reality. "We can do this," Kelvin said, his voice now imbued with a desperate, unyielding conviction. "We have to do this." And with that, we headed out, back towards the very heart of the nightmare, The lab, as we headed west through a series of interconnected hallways, the lights flickered overhead, casting unsettling, grotesque shadows that played tricks on our weary eyes. The remnants of our failed experiment were everywhere. Doors hanging ajar, shattered glass littering the floor like icy shards, and strange, unidentifiable viscous substances staining the walls. A grim, alien residue. We proceeded with extreme caution, knowing that the creatures could be lurking anywhere, their unnatural forms blending into the distorted environment. We came across an intersection and turned south, following the mental map that led to the lab. "Stay close," Eris whispered, her voice filled with tension, a desperate plea. "And be quiet, we don't want to attract their attention." We nodded, our senses heightened, our nerves stretched taut, every muscle coiled. As we turned a corner, we were met with a sight that stopped us in our tracks, a tableau of unspeakable horror. One of the creatures was feasting on something, or someone, a gruesome, indistinct mound of flesh. We froze, horrified, watching as it tore and gnashed with its multiple mouths, its many eyes seemingly blind to our presence, utterly absorbed in its horrific repast. "We need to go back," Kelvin said, his voice barely above a whisper, a desperate gasp. "We'll find another way." We retraced our steps, our hearts pounding, knowing that time was of the essence but utterly unwilling to risk a direct confrontation with such a grotesque, powerful being. After finding an alternate route, a winding path through disused storage rooms and maintenance tunnels, we continued our desperate journey. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, a lifetime of terror, we reached the lab. The door was slightly ajar, a silent invitation to hell. The room was dark, and the air was filled with that strange, metallic scent, now tinged with something sickly sweet, something organic and putrid. We entered the lab, our flashlights cutting through the oppressive gloom, revealing the chaos within. Tables were overturned, equipment was destroyed, and the portal itself, still open, still pulsating with an unnatural, sickly energy, sent shivers down our spines, a profound chill that reached into our very souls. "We need to reverse the polarity of the field," Kelvin explained, his hands already flying across a console, a brilliant mind snapping into action even under immense pressure. "That should collapse the portal and seal the breach." I was at the main console, following his rapid-fire instructions, adjusting settings and monitoring the wildly fluctuating readings. Eris was gathering the necessary tools, her movements efficient and precise. "We have to hurry," Eris said, her voice filled with desperate urgency. "They could be here any minute." We nodded, our actions becoming more hurried, more intense, our focus absolute. The machinery whirred and clicked as we manipulated the controls, the complex systems groaning under the strain. The readings fluctuated wildly, spiking and plummeting, and the portal reacted to our efforts, its energy beginning to shift, the colors changing, the monstrous shape warping and contracting. "We're getting there," Kelvin said, his voice filled with a flicker of hope and grim determination. "Just a little more." But then, a sudden noise, a screeching, tearing sound that sent chills down our spines, the sound of something immense and utterly alien. One of the creatures was in the hallway. "We don't have much time," I said, my voice filled with pure, unadulterated fear. "We have to finish this now." The readings were almost where they needed to be, the portal beginning to waver, its edges shimmering, but the creature was getting closer, its growls and hisses filling the air, a chilling prelude to its arrival. "Almost there," Kelvin yelled, his voice strained, his hands working with lightning speed across the controls. The creature burst into the room, its many eyes fixed on us with a terrifying, malevolent intelligence, its mouths open in a silent, predatory shriek. The creature lunged at us with unnatural speed, a blur of grotesque limbs. Its twisted tendrils reached out, its multiple mouths snapped, its eyes, a chaotic mess of swirling colors, seemed to look in every direction at once, giving it an appearance of profound, unsettling madness. Its strength was terrifying, its form unlike anything we had ever seen or imagined, Eris, and I grabbed whatever we could from the lab tables, heavy tools, metal rods, anything that might serve as a weapon against the abomination. Our efforts were desperate, our actions driven by pure, primal instinct and the terrifying knowledge that failure was not an option. "Kelvin," I shouted, deflecting a sweeping tentacle with a heavy wrench. "Keep it away. Just a bit longer." The creature's skin was like armor, deflecting our blows, resisting our desperate attacks. It moved with a horrifying grace that belied its monstrous appearance, dodging, weaving, and striking with precise, lethal force. The sound it made was a collection of growls, hisses, and screeches that reverberated through the room, a cacophony of pure malice. We fought with everything we had, pushing the creature back, keeping it at bay, all the while acutely aware of Kelvin's continued, desperate work on the portal controls. I caught a glimpse of the portal. It was beginning to collapse, the breach starting to seal, the monstrous tier in reality slowly mending. But the creature was relentless, its attacks never ceasing, its determination clear, driven by some alien purpose. "We're almost there," Kelvin yelled, his voice filled with both raw hope and immense strain. The creature seemed to sense the change, its attacks becoming more frenzied, its movements more desperate. It struck at Eris and she stumbled, a cry of pain escaping her lips as she hit the floor. I moved to help her, but the creature, seeing an opening, seized the opportunity. It lunged at Kelvin, a direct, final strike. But just as its grotesque clawed hand reached for him, the portal collapsed. The energy dissipated with a blinding flash, and the breach sealed with a sound like thunder, a crack that shook the very foundations of the facility. The room plunged into sudden, oppressive silence, the chaos replaced by an eerie stillness. We stood, panting, our bodies aching, our minds reeling from the sheer intensity of the struggle. We looked at the creature, which now writhed on the floor, its monstrous form changing, unraveling, its essence seemingly dissolving as the connection to its dimension was severed. "It's over," Kelvin said, his voice filled with disbelief, a whisper of profound exhaustion. We did it. We looked at each other, our faces pale, streaked with sweat and grime, our hearts still pounding like war drums. But the creature, though weakened, was still alive, still a threat, its dying spasms a grim reminder that the danger was not yet past. We still had to find a way to escape the facility, to survive the remaining, unseen creatures, to get to safety. With the portal closed and the immediate threat subdued, our attention shifted to our escape from the facility. The creature, weakened by the collapse of the portal, continued to writhe on the floor, but we knew we couldn't waste time watching it. There might be more creatures lurking in the hallways, drawn by the residual energy, by the scent of our fear. "We have to leave now," Kelvin said, urgency returning to his voice, cutting through the heavy silence. "We've closed the portal, but we're not safe yet." We quickly gathered what we needed, a few essential tools, some data drives holding critical information, and documents that might help us understand what exactly went wrong, what Kronos had really been trying to do. We were also acutely aware that the facility's lockdown was still in effect, and we had to find a way to override it and reach the exit. "We need to head to the main control room," Eris suggested, her voice still strained but clear. "That's where we can override the lockdown and get us out of here." As we made our way through the facility, the flickering lights revealed even more signs of the creature's pervasive presence. Claw marks gouged deep into the metal walls, strange, iridescent slime that glimmered ominously in the dim light, and unsettling, guttural noises that echoed through the abandoned corridors, keeping us on edge, every nerve screaming. We turned a corner and came across a room with a shattered window. From the inside, we could see that something immense had clawed its way out, leaving behind a trail of sickening destruction. The sharp, acrid smell of some alien substance filled the air, and I felt a fresh shiver run down my spine. "We need to keep moving," Kelvin urged, his eyes darting. At one point we heard a skittering sound just behind us, a horrifying scuttle on the metal floor. We froze, turning slowly, our hearts hammering against our ribs. There, at a distance, one of the creatures, its form indistinct in the gloom, was stalking us, its eyes glowing with malevolent intent. "We need to hide," Eris whispered, her eyes wide with terror. We ducked into a nearby storage room, holding our breath, our bodies pressed against cold shelves. As the creature crept past, its heavy, dragging footfalls echoing outside. We waited, time stretching, every second an eternity, until we were certain it had moved on, its presence fading into the deeper shadows. Finally, we emerged and continued our journey, the close call invigorating our desperate resolve. We came across more signs of the creature's passage. Doors torn from their hinges, machines twisted and destroyed, and strange, angular symbols carved into the walls, as if marking territory, claiming dominion. As we approached the main control room, we found the heavy door partially open, hanging off its hinges, clearly forced open by immense, brute strength. The sight sent another chill through me, and I could see the fresh wave of concern in my companion's eyes. "Be ready for anything," Kelvin warned, his voice steady but the fear ever evident in his tense posture. He reached for a makeshift weapon, a heavy metal pipe we'd picked up earlier, and we slowly entered. Inside, we found the control room in utter disarray. Monitors were smashed, glass shards glittering under the faint emergency lights. Papers were scattered everywhere, and chairs were overturned, a violent, destructive chaos. It was clear that something had been here, something powerful and enraged. The room smelled foul, a combination of ozone, decay, and a metallic tang, and the air was thick with a palpable sense of malice. We immediately set to work, carefully stepping over the debris. Kelvin headed straight for the controls, his fingers already flying across the damaged console. Aris and I positioned ourselves by the door, our eyes scanning the hallway, our ears straining for any sound that might signal the approach of the creatures. The minutes dragged on, an agonizing crawl, as Kelvin worked to override the lockdown. Aris and I exchanged worried glances, the tension building, the fear growing with every passing moment. We could hear distant, unsettling sounds, scrapes, growls, the faint, wet slithering hints of movement in the labyrinthine facility. We could see the progress on the screens, a slow, agonizing crawl, and the threat was never far away, always lurking. Finally, Kelvin let out a triumphant, guttural cry, a gasp of pure relief. "I've done it," he exclaimed, his face lighting up with a mixture of exhaustion and profound joy. "The lockdown is overridden." The facility's blaring alarms fell silent, and the oppressive, piercing noise was replaced by a deafening quiet that was somehow even more terrifying. A stillness that felt unnatural, holding its breath with the lockdown overridden. We wasted no time. We gathered what few supplies we could find, essential tools, and headed towards the emergency exit. The facility was eerily silent now, the alarms gone, but the haunting, pervasive presence of the creatures was still there, a heavy weight in the air. We moved through the hallways with extreme caution, knowing that the creatures were still out there, knowing that any moment could bring another terrifying encounter. Our path was marked by destruction and chaos, the horrifying aftermath of the horrors we had unleashed, of the veil we had torn. As we approached the exit, our pace quickened, desperation fueling our tired bodies. We turned a final corner, and there it was, the exit, a beacon of hope, tantalizingly close, but then we heard it. A growl, low and menacing, a sound that froze our blood and stopped us in our tracks. One of the creatures was near, its twisted form lurking in the deeper shadows just before the exit, its eyes glowing with malevolent malice. We had no choice but to run, our feet pounding on the cold floor, our breath ragged, our hearts racing, a desperate, frantic sprint. The creature gave chase, its heavy, unnatural thudding echoing behind us. We reached the exit, the heavy steel door just ahead, our escape within reach. Kelvin, with a final burst of adrenaline, reached for the controls. The door slid open, groaning on its hinges, and we spilled out into the night, gasping, our lungs burning. The creature's roar echoed behind us, a sound that would haunt me forever, a primal scream of rage and frustration. We didn't stop running, not until the facility was a distant, dark shape melting into the night, its menacing silhouette a scar on the horizon. We collapsed onto the cold, damp ground, our bodies spent, our minds reeling, the terror still fresh, the memories still raw. We had escaped, but the scars would remain, forever etched into our very souls. The knowledge of what we had done, the horrifying understanding of what we had unleashed, would be a burden we would carry with us always. We walked away, our steps heavy, our faces pale, knowing that we had survived, but also knowing that we had changed, irrevocably. That we would never, ever be the same again. The weeks that followed Project Ether were a blur of debriefings, psychological evaluations, and the eerie, suffocating silence of secrets kept. They told us it was contained. They told us it was over. But how do you contain a tear in reality? How do you unsee the nightmares that have walked among you? I found myself adrift, haunted by the visceral memories of the labyrinthine facility, the creatures, the screams. Sleep offered no escape, only vivid replays of the terror, the stench of decay, the impossible forms moving in impossible ways. And then, slowly, insidiously, other images began to surface, not from the facility, but from somewhere far older, far deeper in my memory. They were fragmented at first, like old, decaying photographs, but they coalesced, solidifying into something just as chilling as the horrors of Project Ether. I remember standing in my old schoolyard, the uneven, coarse bricks of the wall pressing into my back, their cold, gritty texture a stark contrast to the rough fabric of my school uniform. I'd shift my weight trying to find a comfortable spot, but it never quite worked. I'd glance around, the playground often seeming to hold its breath, swings hanging motionless, the soccer ball abandoned midfield, even the usually chirping birds sometimes falling silent. My eyes would inevitably focus on a group of kids, their excited chatter growing louder as they congregated. At the center of the gathering was Jamie, his normally mischievous face serious today, eyes intent, fingers tightly clutching a piece of white chalk. The sky above us would be a heavy blanket of gray clouds, their thick layers obstructing any hint of the sun's brightness, casting a dim, almost surreal light over the playground. Shadows would dance and flicker as the children moved, the whole schoolyard seemingly holding its breath, waiting for whatever Jamie was about to do. "Watch this," Jamie would say with a smirk, his face glowing with a mischievous, yet somewhat sinister light. With a sure hand and practiced ease, he'd start to craft a rectangular door on the wall with the chalk. Each passing minute, more kids would trickle in, abandoning their games and conversations to join the growing crowd. Soon, I'd find myself amidst a sea of perhaps 30 students, each craning their necks, tiptoeing to get a better view of the chalk door that Jamie was sketching with meticulous care. A profound silence would fall over us, a silence so deep it seemed to swallow even the distant sounds of traffic and the chirping of birds. After Jamie finished drawing the door, he'd take a step back. "Now you knock 3 times and listen," he'd instruct, his voice dropping to a whisper that meshed eerily with the quiet atmosphere enveloping the playground. I remembered raising an eyebrow, unable to shake off the skeptical wall I'd built in my mind. "What's this all about?" I'd asked, my voice showing a hint of curiosity despite my initial reluctance to engage. Clara, one of my classmates, with expressive eyes that now flickered with an unsettling mixture of excitement and fear, would lean in and whisper hurriedly, "It's the new game everyone's playing. Some kids say they hear whispers when they knock." I couldn't help but laugh, albeit nervously, trying to dismiss the growing tension that coiled in the pit of my stomach. "Sounds like a made-up rumor to get everyone excited," I'd say, attempting to mask the uneasiness that had begun to gnaw at me. But as Jamie finished drawing and stepped back, the magnetic pull of the chalk door and the riveted enthusiasm gleaming in the eyes of the gathered children were undeniable. The playground, which moments ago had been filled with innocent laughter and playful shouts, now held an oppressive silence, as if time itself was holding its breath, watching us with anticipation. With a dramatic embellishment that seemed both theatrical and ritualistic, Jamie would approach the chalk door. He'd extend his hand, the smirk on his face replaced by a serious, almost trance-like expression. The chalk had left white residue on his hands, making his skin appear ghostly in the subdued light. He'd knock firmly, the sound echoing like a drum in the quiet, each knock resonating with a deep, hollow thud that seemed to reverberate in our chests. We'd all go silent, an involuntary collective hush that descended upon us like a heavy fog. I'd find myself straining my ears, a part of me wishing to debunk the eerie claims surrounding the chalk door, yet another part, a deeper, more primal part, half expecting to hear the whispers that were rumored to come from it. And then, in the oppressive silence, there it was. A murmur, soft and almost distant, yet undeniably present. I'd strained to discern the words, but they remained elusive, dancing just beyond the boundary of comprehension. The ethereal sound would send a shiver down my spine, a cold, foreboding sensation that seemed to penetrate deep into my very core. Suddenly, I'd feel a nudge on my arm. I turned to see Clara, her usually vibrant face now pale and drained of color, her lips trembling slightly. Her voice, barely above a whisper, would betray her shock. "Did you hear that?" I'd nod slowly, my eyes locked onto the chalk door, which now seemed even more menacing. "Yeah," I'd reply, my voice hoarse with apprehension. "What was that?" Clara would gulp, her wide eyes shimmering with a mix of curiosity and fear. "I don't know, but it's creepy." Her words would hang in the air, creating an unsettling resonance with the murmurs we just heard dot in the days that followed. The legend of the chalk door game became the talk of the school. Stories, both real and embellished, were whispered in hushed tones during recess, lunch breaks, and even in the quieter moments of class. The allure of the unknown, combined with the tantalizing thrill of the game, proved irresistible. The schoolyard wall soon became a collection of numerous chalk doors. Each day, like a ritual, more and more children gathering around the wall, eager to experience the phenomenon firsthand. They draw their own doors with varying degrees of artistry. For most, the experience ended in disappointment, the silence of the wall mocking their anticipation. They'd walk away, a mix of relief and frustration evident on their faces, claiming to hear nothing. Yet every now and then, amidst the growing crowd of skeptics and thrill-seekers, a child's face would suddenly lose its color, their eyes widening in terror. These were the moments when the whispers made their presence felt, ensnaring another unsuspecting listener into their eerie embrace. As these instances became more frequent, the atmosphere around the school grew even more charged, a volatile mix of skepticism, fear, and an insatiable curiosity propelling the legend of the chalk door to heights of infamy during lunch. The school cafeteria was alive with the sound of countless conversations, but our table was noticeably quieter. I sat next to Clara, joined by Marcus and a couple of other friends, Chloe and Liam. Despite the different foods on our trays and the general chatter around us, our minds were fixated on one subject, and it wasn't long before the topic of the chalk door became the focal point of our discussion. Marcus, a budding intellectual even then, adjusted his glasses with a sense of gravitas. "I heard a full sentence yesterday," he'd declare, looking around to ensure he had our undivided attention. The voice was faint, and I couldn't really make out the words, but they were definitely structured, not just random sounds. Clara would freeze, her fork pausing midair. "Every time I think about it, I get goosebumps," she'd confess, her voice barely more than a whisper. I'd rub my hands together, taking a deep, steadying breath. A part of me was intrigued, while another part cautioned restraint. "You know what?" I'd suggest. "We should try it again, but this time let's do it together." Chloe, who had been mostly silent, would nod her agreement, her brunette hair falling over her face as she did. "Sounds like a plan," she'd say, a hint of nervous excitement in her voice later in the day. Once the final bell rang and most students headed home or to their respective after-school activities, we'd make our way to a less frequented part of the schoolyard. The far wall, partially obscured by an old oak tree, provided the seclusion we desired. I'd take the chalk from my bag, and I could feel the eyes of my friends on me, their collective breaths held in anticipation as I began to draw the door. The door would take shape, each stroke seeming to amplify the gravity of what we were about to do. As the final line was drawn, I'd step back, allowing the others to admire the door. Without much ceremony, I'd raise my hand and knock 3 times on the chalk door. Clara, Marcus, Chloe, Liam, and I would lean in, our ears straining, our hearts racing, waiting for any sign, any whisper from the other side. The air would vibrate with the eerie sound of the murmur, which now resonated louder than before, bearing a complexity that was absent in the earlier encounters. The whispers would mesh and tangle, creating a cacophony, an unsettling chorus that seemed to be coming from somewhere far, yet oddly close. The air would be filled with the eerie sound of a murmur that was now loud and more complex than I'd heard before. The whispers would intertwine and tangle, creating a collection of sounds that sent a chill down my spine. It sounded like multiple voices whispering at once. They seemed to be coming from somewhere far away, yet strangely close. Marcus's face would contort in a mixture of disbelief and recognition. He'd adjust his glasses, trying to comprehend what he'd just heard. I know this sounds crazy," he'd stammer, his voice quivering, "but that sounded eerily like my grandmother's voice. And she passed away 2 years ago." Clara's face, already pale from our earlier encounters with the chalk door, would drain even more color. Her eyes would dart around nervously, as if expecting some phantom figure to emerge. "That's not all," she'd admit, her voice shaky. "I distinctly heard my mom's voice calling my name, but she's at work." A cold, terrifying realization would wash over me. What we once dismissed as mere child's play, a fun schoolyard game, was turning into something much more sinister. But with this growing sense of fear, there was an undeniable magnetic pull, a desperate, almost obsessive desire to understand the mystery of the chalk door. The school continued buzzing with tales of the chalk door. As days turned into weeks, the game's popularity reached unprecedented heights. The whispers, no longer just a rarity, became a common occurrence, becoming louder and clearer with each passing day. Many students, entranced by the phenomenon, claimed they'd started recognizing familiar voices among the whispers. Voices of long-lost relatives, distant friends, or even acquaintances they saw every day. Others recounted tales of receiving cryptic, sometimes chilling messages from the other side of the door. Chloe, for instance, insisted that the whispers warned her about a pending test in her math class, while another student swore they heard a voice reciting lines from a poem they hadn't studied yet. The mystery deepened, and theories about the chalk door's origins spread like wildfire. Some students were convinced they were communicating with spirits from the other side, believing the wall was a conduit to the afterlife. Others, more skeptical, suspected a prank, hypothesizing that someone had planted hidden microphones and speakers in the wall to mess with the students. A few even joked about it being a government experiment or an elaborate marketing ploy. But in the middle of the speculation and fear, the allure of the chalk door remained, drawing more and more of the school's population. The schoolyard, once a place of innocent play, had transformed into a hub of supernatural intrigue one afternoon. While we stood in front of a chalk door once again, the wind carried a chill, causing me to shiver as I tugged my jacket closer. The schoolyard, usually bustling with laughter and activity, felt eerily quiet, as if even the elements sensed the tension in the air. Clara shifted from foot to foot, her dark hair blowing across her face, while Marcus tried to exude a confidence he clearly didn't feel, adjusting his cap. Chloe nervously fidgeted with her bracelet, and Liam was busy surveying the surroundings, as if looking for an escape route should we need one. Today, we were also joined by a few more friends. There was Stella, a girl from my English class with fiery red hair, Owen, a tall kid known for his love of comic books, and Maya, a quiet girl with deep brown eyes that always seemed to be observing everything closely. "So, who's going first?" Owen's voice wavered more than he probably intended it to. He looked around expectantly, and the strain was evident in his wide eyes. Stella rolled her eyes playfully. "Tradition first," she reminded him, her tone teasing yet gentle, trying to inject a bit of levity into the mounting tension. She made a dramatic gesture, giving a mock bow that caused a few of us to chuckle, though the laughter was short-lived. Chloe stepped forward, the sleeves of her sweater unable to hide the subtle quiver of her fingers. She hesitated for just a moment, her eyes darting across our faces, perhaps seeking some reassurance. Taking a steadying breath, she knocked on the chalk door. 1, 2, 3. The sound, a soft thud, resonated, cutting through the thick silence. We had done this many times before, and by now the routine was familiar. We held our breath, our ears straining for those elusive murmurs. Yet, as the seconds dragged on, it became apparent that this wasn't like the previous times. The typical silence was interrupted by a soft, drawn-out creaking, reminiscent of an old attic door or rusty hinges that hadn't been moved in ages. The sound sent a ripple of profound unease through the group. And then, the chalk outline began to move, our eyes widened in synchronized disbelief. The door started to slowly swing open, inwards, revealing an abyss of inky black darkness that seemed to absorb all light, to swallow the very essence of the world. No one spoke. The surrounding atmosphere was eerily quiet. It felt like the very air we breathed had turned heavy, infused with a chilling and electrifying tension that gripped each of us in a vice of apprehension and awe. Maya broke the silence. She whispered, her voice carrying a weight of dread that amplified in the still air, "I don't like this." Her deep brown eyes were now filled with fear and uncertainty. "This isn't like before," she added, the unsettling transformation of the chalk door reflected in her worried gaze. Stella gave a slow, uneasy nod, mirroring Maya's sentiment. "Yeah, this feels wrong," she muttered beside me. Clara's fingers wrapped around my arm, her grip growing increasingly tight, her skin pale, her knuckles turning white. "What do we do now?" Her voice was barely more than a breath, fragile and filled with a vulnerability that reflected the sentiments we all harbored but were afraid to voice. Before I could muster any words of reassurance or formulate a plan, Owen, who had initially displayed such hesitancy, seemed to be overtaken by a surge of reckless, terrifying curiosity. His tall frame leaned forward, almost drawn by an invisible string. "Hello," he called out bravely, his voice echoing strangely, creating a series of haunting reverberations that lingered in the air like a dark symphony. The darkness beyond the door seemed to respond, its inky depths pulsing in a manner that felt almost sentient, luring Owen with a magnetic pull. It was as if the void recognized him and acknowledged his presence with a dark embrace that sought to claim him. And without any further resistance, Owen stepped into the opening, swallowed whole by the profound darkness, leaving us standing and staring at the abyss in front of us, utterly aghast. "Owen," Stella screamed, her voice laced with sheer panic and disbelief, a sound that tore through the sudden silence. But before any of us could react, an overpowering, unseen force ensnared us. Liam was pulled in next, a blur of motion, vanishing into the black. Chloe was drawn in after him. She reached out as if grasping for something to anchor her, but her fingers closed on nothing, and she too was gone. Stella was swallowed next, her fiery hair the last thing to disappear. Maya entered with a silent, horrified expression, her eyes wide, her mouth open in a soundless scream. And Clara, her grip on my arm, that desperate, reassuring grip, loosened, then vanished into the void with a petrified gasp. Though my mind raced, trying to grapple with the situation, trying to flee, the pull became insurmountable. I felt an inexorable tug, a gravitational force unlike anything I had ever experienced, pulling me closer and closer to the dark expanse. My feet left the ground, and the familiar world, the schoolyard, blurred and distorted, twisting into a chaotic swirl of colors and shapes. A sudden, jarring sensation enveloped me as I landed. The ground beneath me was cold and unpleasantly damp, a moistness that seeped through my clothes, chilling me to the bone. My fingers instinctively clutched the surface, but they were met with a slimy, almost gelatinous texture that made my skin crawl, a sickening, organic ooze. Quickly, I pushed myself up, and the sliminess left a foul residue on my hands, a tangible sign of where I was. I found myself standing within an expansive, maze-like dimension. It was otherworldly, surreal. The walls, impossibly high and seemingly endless, were alive with a pulsating luminescence, casting an eerie blue-green glow. This soft, phosphorescent light revealed unsettling, undulating shadows that danced and flickered with an unpredictable, horrifying rhythm. Every surface seemed to breathe, to shift, creating an illusion of constant, unsettling movement. The air was heavy and almost viscous, clinging to my skin and making each breath a laborious effort. It felt like I was inhaling a mixture of cold mist and an earthy musk, dense with hints of decay and something metallic, reminiscent of old iron. A hushed, constant whisper reverberated around me, its source indecipherable, an endless, maddening chorus. "Is everyone here?" Marcus's voice rang out, his tone a fragile mix of desperate hope and profound concern. I swiveled around, scanning my surroundings. The peculiar luminescent glow of the walls cast an ethereal, sickly light upon my friends' faces, their expressions mirroring my own feelings. A jumbled mess of astonishment, fear, and deep uncertainty. Their eyes were wide, taking in the massive, pulsating walls of the maze that encircled us, the impossible landscape. Stella's fiery hair seemed almost ablaze in the odd light, while Maya's deep brown eyes reflected the dancing glow, filled with a deep, unsettling contemplation. The maze sprawled out, seemingly infinite in every conceivable direction. There was the sound of dripping water somewhere in the distance, along with the occasional soft rustle, like something skittering just out of sight, something watching. We gathered closer, forming a tight, desperate circle, the crushing realization weighing heavily on us all. The chalk door game, once an innocent pastime driven by childish curiosity, had propelled us into this daunting, horrifying dimension. The chilling silence of the maze was abruptly broken by a soft, eerie hiss. My head jerked up, and my eyes darted side to side as I strained to locate the origin of the sound. In the dim, otherworldly glow that emanated from the maze's walls, I caught a fleeting glimpse of something, just a flicker of movement out of the corner of my eye. Clara gripped my arm, her nails almost digging into my skin, a painful anchor. "Did you see that?" she whispered, her voice barely a breath. "Yeah," I responded, swallowing hard, my voice quivering, betraying the raw fear I was trying desperately to hide. I looked around and noticed that the others had paused too, their faces under the unusual light of the maze, reflecting the same mixture of fear and dawning horror. Their expressions deepened into growing horror as they too registered the presence of something utterly, profoundly other. "Relax," Marcus tried to inject a sense of ease into the terrifying situation. "It's probably just our imagination playing tricks on us," he offered, with a measured, strained tone, though I detected some profound uncertainty in his voice. "This place," he gestured around, emphasizing the ethereal lighting and the looming, impossible walls of the maze, "is so strange. It's no wonder it's making us all jumpy." As if on cue, just as Marcus's words hung in the thick, viscous air, a shadowy figure, swift and almost silent, dashed past us. Its movement was fluid, like ink spilling in water, an unnatural ripple of darkness. While the rapid pace of the figure prevented a clear view, there was one element that was undeniably evident: its glowing eyes. They weren't just luminescent, they possessed an intense, penetrating gaze that seemed to pierce right through me, chilling me to my core, seeing everything. Chloe let out a scream, a sharp and piercing sound that resonated ominously within the cold, pulsating walls of the maze. She was pointing frantically in another direction, her face pale with pure horror. "There's more of them." I turned swiftly, my eyes meeting a terrifying sight. Several more creatures were emerging from the darkness that enveloped us, their grotesque forms gradually becoming clearer under the feeble, sickly light cast by the maze's walls. The creatures were nightmarish beyond words. They possessed elongated, gnarled limbs, which dripped with a kind of viscous, dark ooze that seemed to absorb the light around it, rendering the creatures almost shadow-like. Their mouths were wide, filled with jagged, gleaming teeth that reflected the maze's dim light with a sinister, hungry shine. It was an image of pure, unadulterated horror, one that gripped us all in a paralyzing fear. Amid the increasing panic, Owen found his voice, albeit a shaky one that barely disguised his rising terror. "We need to move, right now," he said, the urgency in his voice snapping us into immediate action. No one dared to oppose him. With hearts racing and breaths coming in ragged gasps, we formed a huddled, protective group, a desperate attempt to create a united front, trying our best to stick together as we navigated the nightmarish world we found ourselves in. Suddenly, I began to hear the distant cries of others, faint and terrified. "We're not the only ones in here," Stella murmured, her usual fiery spirit momentarily dimmed by the gruesome reality unfolding around us. Despite the fear visibly gnawing at her, she managed to rally, her voice firm yet tinged with desperation. "We have to stick together," she urged, her eyes scanning each of our frightened faces, a fierce determination flickering within them. "It's our best chance. We need to find the others, too." Liam's voice pierced the tense air, his eyes darting from one corner of the maze to another, a mix of fear and desperation in his gaze, yearning to catch a glimpse of our other classmates. With each step we took, the maze seemed to come alive, playing its twisted games on our senses. There were constant, soft, haunting squelches echoing throughout the corridors. These were unmistakably the sounds of the creature's movements, and they followed us, a chilling, persistent presence. We continued on, our steps slightly more hurried now, but this maze wasn't keen on letting its prey go easily. As we moved forward, we were forced into a particularly narrow passage, the pulsating walls pressing in from both sides, suffocating us. Just as I thought it couldn't get any more claustrophobic, a chilling hiss sounded from behind us, directly behind Clara. I turned my head just in time to see a creature lunging towards us, its elongated limb reaching out to catch its next victim. Clara, who was right at the back of our line, was its intended target. I could see her eyes widen in pure, unadulterated terror, and her body was frozen in fear, rigid as stone. But in a blur of movement, Marcus reacted, using his quick reflexes. He reached out, grabbing Clara by the arm and yanking her beyond the creature's grasp. They both stumbled forward, and we all increased our pace, a desperate scramble, trying to put as much distance as possible between us and that grotesque creature. "We can't just run around aimlessly," Owen said, each word punctuated by his heavy, ragged breathing. Our constant dodging and weaving had taken a toll, and it was evident in the weary, drawn expressions all around me. "You're right," I said, taking a deep, shaky breath, trying to calm my racing heart. "We need to be more strategic. Perhaps we could divert their attention somehow, keep them off our trail for a while." Chloe, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly looked up, her eyes glinting with a spark of inspiration, a flash of her usual ingenuity. "What if we use the walls?" she suggested, her voice gaining strength. "The walls glow, right? Maybe we can craft makeshift torches. Light could deter these creatures or at least distract them." Clara looked at Chloe, a flicker of hope in her eyes. "It's worth a shot," she said, her voice firm, resolute. We quickly got to work, chipping away pieces of the glowing walls, the strange, phosphorescent material crumbling under our fingers. We wrapped them with bits of our clothing, tearing strips from our shirts and jackets. We managed to create crude torches. They emitted a soft, eerie light, but it was enough to illuminate our immediate surroundings and, potentially, ward off our pursuers. With our newfound sources of light, our journey through the maze became slightly more bearable. The glow from the torches gave us a clearer view of our surroundings and, hopefully, an advantage over the creatures. As we navigated the corridors, we were greeted by familiar faces, some classmates emerging from hiding spots, their eyes wide with fear, their faces a ghostly shade of white. Together, with our increasing numbers and the light from our torches, we continued our desperate search for an exit. The weight of fatigue pressed on me, making every step feel as if I were wading through thick mud. Every muscle in my body ached, magnifying the exhaustion that engulfed me. My stomach churned, the hollow pit of hunger reminding me of the hours we'd spent navigating this strange, terrifying place. My eyes darted around, searching for any sign of hope or escape. As they did, I couldn't help but notice Clara, Owen, and Chloe. Their once bright, youthful faces now wore the same expression of utter exhaustion and profound fear as mine. Clara's normally rosy cheeks were pale, sweat beaded on her forehead, and her gaze was unfocused, distant. Owen's strong posture had given way to a weary slouch, while Chloe's vivacious energy was now reduced to lethargic, almost automatic movements. The optimism and determination that had initially fueled us seemed to be dwindling, replaced by a creeping despair. "I can't go on much longer," Maya murmured, her voice barely cutting through the stifling silence of the maze. Her deep brown eyes, which used to sparkle with curiosity, now looked dull with exhaustion, utterly devoid of life. Suddenly, Stella stopped in her tracks. She bent down, picking up something small from the slimy ground. "It's chalk," she declared, the surprise evident in her voice, causing a ripple of excitement among us, a flicker of hope in the suffocating darkness. She held it up, rolling it between her fingers. Marcus immediately saw the potential, a glimmer of desperate hope appearing in his eyes. "We can use it to mark our path," he suggested eagerly, nodding in agreement. Clara took a piece from Stella. With a determined hand, she scribbled an arrow on the glowing wall, indicating the direction we were headed. "We should make consistent symbols," she advised, her voice firm. "Let's keep it simple. Arrows for direction and X's for dead ends." As we continued our journey, armed with our pieces of chalk, the walls of the maze began to fill with our frantic markings, a desperate attempt to bring order to chaos. But as our determination grew, so did the aggression of the creatures. They seemed to anticipate our every move, their unnatural senses finally attuned to our presence, and it didn't take us long to realize they were setting traps. "There," Owen whispered, his voice sharp with alarm. He pointed ahead, where, upon closer inspection, a thin, almost invisible tripwire stretched from one wall to the other, barely discernible against the glowing floor. Marcus approached it with caution. With careful precision, he stepped over the tripwire, signaling for us to follow suit. His face, usually calm and analytical, showed a hint of profound concern. "We need to be careful," he advised, looking each of us in the eye. "These creatures are more clever than we initially thought." But even as he spoke, a blood-curdling screech tore through the heavy air of the maze. The sound seemed to come from all directions, bouncing off the pulsating walls and filling the corridors, a chilling symphony of predator and prey. I looked at the others and saw the same profound, frightening look on their faces. We had to find our way out, and fast. As we continued walking, shadows began to play cruel tricks on our weary, hallucinating eyes. One of these shadows, however, wasn't an illusion. It suddenly darted across our path. Clara, caught off guard, lost her footing and stumbled right into one of the creature's carefully concealed traps. It was a net, camouflaged with the surrounding floor, which sprang to life, ensnaring her and swiftly hoisting her off the ground. She hung suspended in the air, her legs kicking frantically, her voice full of pure terror reverberating through the corridor. Without hesitation, Stella and Owen sprang into action. Stella, using the sharp edge of a piece of broken torch, began sawing at the tough, fibrous ropes, while Owen steadied the net, ensuring it didn't swing and injure Clara further. The rest of us formed a protective circle around them, our torches held high, ready to ward off any curious creatures drawn by Clara's desperate cries. After what felt like an eternity, but in reality was only a few minutes, Clara's feet touched the ground again, trembling. Once we were certain she was unhurt, Maya stepped forward, her voice always composed, now carried an edge of steely determination. "We need to outsmart them," she declared. "If they're setting traps for us, why don't we give them a taste of their own medicine?" Liam's lips curled into a weak but determined grin. "Turn the tables on them. I like it." His agreement injected a spark of desperate hope into the exhausted group. Pooling our limited resources became a group activity. We tore strips from our clothing, used the chalk not just for markings but for misdirection, and scavenged the maze for anything that could be of use. Marcus, displaying unexpected resourcefulness, constructed a crude figure using his jacket, stuffed with an assortment of debris. It assumed a vaguely humanoid shape. He held up the dummy for all to see. "We place these in pathways," he explained, a flicker of cunning in his eyes. "If we can draw the creature's attention to these, even for a moment, it could buy us the precious time we need." Hours passed, feeling like days, and our traps proved somewhat effective, allowing us brief moments of rest, brief reprieves from the constant terror. Suddenly, the air changed. I got a strange feeling, a profound shift in the very atmosphere. My skin prickled, and I could see Clara's hair standing on end, tiny strands floating as if the air was charged with static electricity. The other members of our group were now alert, sensing the same profound change that I felt. A few paces to our left, Marcus paused and sniffed the air, looking puzzled. "Do you smell that?" he asked, his brows furrowed. "It's fresh, like after a rainstorm." Chloe nodded in agreement, inhaling deeply. "Yes, and there's a slight warmth, too." Carefully, we slowed down, bracing ourselves for whatever this could mean, a fresh hope igniting in our chests. After a minute or so of walking, we rounded a corner, and there it was, roughly 30 yards away. A chalk door, just like the one we used to enter this horrifying place. Owen was the first to speak up, his gaze darting between the door and the lurking shadows where the creatures hid. "We need to be cautious," he warned. "This might be our exit, but it's also the most vulnerable we've been. They know it's our way out." I couldn't help but agree with him. As tempting as the door was, the looming threat of the creatures waiting in ambush cast a dark shadow over our newfound hope. As our group edged closer to the chalk door, the sense of unease grew, solidifying into dread. I squinted into the maze's dim, sickly light, trying to make out any movement. Suddenly Chloe gasped, her hand shooting out to point to the left of the door. "There," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. Following her direction, I saw them. The creatures were not hiding in the shadows anymore. They were positioned strategically around the chalk door, some crouched almost like sprinters, ready to bolt, while others were upright, silently observing us, waiting for the perfect moment. To the right of the door, 3 creatures were clustered together, their elongated limbs twitching in anticipation, their dripping ooze forming small puddles that reflected the eerie glow of the walls. Directly above the door, I spotted another 2 creatures, their clawed fingers gripping the maze's high walls, ready to pounce from an aerial advantage. The distance between us and the chalk door felt both agonizingly short and endlessly long, an impossible chasm. With the creatures positioned as they were, any approach seemed futile. A death sentence Marcus stepped forward, his face showing a grim determination amidst the palpable fear. "We've come this far together," he declared, his voice resolute, drawing on some unseen reserve of courage. "We are not backing down now." Owen nodded, then added, "We need a coordinated effort. A few of us distract the creatures while the rest make a break for the door." I could see Stella, Clara, and Chloe grouping together, their eyes meeting, forming a silent plan of action. Clara took a deep breath and looked at each of us, her gaze firm. "We'll be the distraction," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. Stella held her makeshift torch high, the glow from the walls flickering off its surface. "Together," she added, her voice carrying a newfound strength. Then, without another word, Clara, Stella, and Chloe broke from the group, their shouts echoing through the maze as they drew the attention of the creatures. It worked. The creatures' heads snapped towards them, their eerie eyes following the trio as they led them away from the door, a desperate, terrifying gambit. My heart felt like it was in my throat as I watched them go, but there was no time to lose. "Now," Marcus shouted, ushering the rest of us towards the door, his hand pushing me forward. As we got closer, I glanced back only once, catching sight of Clara, Stella, and Chloe. Their faces contorted with a mixture of fear and fierce determination as they led the creatures on a dangerous, suicidal chase. We reached the door, out of breath and fueled by pure adrenaline. Liam and Maya frantically searched the chalk surface, looking for any hint on how to open it. The knock. "Remember the game?" Maya exclaimed, her voice frantic, a desperate memory surfacing. Without hesitation, I stepped forward, my hand shaking uncontrollably as I knocked 3 times on the chalk surface. Time seemed to freeze as we held our breath, praying for a miracle. Slowly, agonizingly, the door creaked open, revealing the familiar sight of our schoolyard, bathed in the soft, fading light of a late afternoon. Relief washed over me, a powerful, overwhelming wave, but it was short-lived. "We can't leave them," Owen shouted, his face twisted with worry for the brave trio, his eyes darting between the safety of the schoolyard and the horrors of the maze. But before we could act, a shout rang out from behind us. "Go!" It was Chloe, her voice carrying a tone of urgent, desperate finality. We glanced back to see them, not far behind, sprinting towards us with the creatures hot on their trail, a horrifying procession. With tears in our eyes, we stepped through the threshold, and the creatures stopped, as if an invisible barrier held them back, their grotesque forms pressing against an unseen wall. Clara, Stella, and Chloe crossed through just in time, their bodies collapsing onto the grass, and the chalk door slammed shut behind them with a profound, final thud. The creatures scratched and clawed at the barrier, their frustrated screeches echoing in the now distant maze, fading into a chilling memory. We collapsed onto the schoolyard ground, our bodies shaking, the trauma and fear of the maze still clinging to us like a shroud. But we were out, we were safe, the nightmare was over. Yet the haunting memories of the maze and those terrifying creatures would linger. In the weeks that followed, the schoolyard felt eerily quiet. The once joyful sounds of children playing were replaced with hushed whispers and somber faces. The school community was in shock. Several students never made it out of the maze, forever lost to the clutches of the creatures. Those of us who escaped gathered often, finding comfort in one another, sharing our experiences and grieving our lost friends. Nightmares were frequent, vivid, and many of us saw therapists to cope with the trauma. Teachers and counselors tried their best to provide a sense of normalcy. They brought in grief counselors and held memorial services for the missing students. But there was an undeniable void, a sense of loss that permeated every corner of the school. Rumors circulated about the chalk door and the horrors it hid. Some said it was an old legend, a curse brought to life by our innocent game. But we, the survivors, knew the truth. It was a nightmare, a realm of terror that we were lucky to escape. The door itself became a taboo. Chalk was banned from school, and the spot where the door once stood was cordoned off. A memorial was erected there, with the names of the lost inscribed on it. As days turned into weeks and weeks into months, life started to find its rhythm again. But for those of us who lived through the horror of the maze, life was never truly the same. The lost were never forgotten. Every year on the anniversary of that fateful day, we would gather at the memorial, lighting candles and saying a prayer for our friends who never made it out. Their memories, like the haunting memories of the maze, are forever carved into our hearts. And now, as I reflect on Project Ether, the adult nightmare, the truth slams into me with the force of a physical blow. The chalk door. The chalk door was the first breach. Not a man-made portal, but something far more insidious, a natural tear, a localized weakness in the fabric of reality that children, in their innocent play, stumbled upon. Those whispers, the familiar voices, the grotesque creatures. It wasn't just a game, it was real. And I, Elias Vance, the child who escaped, became the man who, decades later, unwittingly tried to open that same door on a far grander, more devastating scale. Project Ether didn't just open a portal. It attempted to master something that had always been there, subtly bleeding into our world through the most unexpected seams. The chalk door was not an accident, it was a symptom, and the horrifying implication. The portal at the facility was sealed, yes, but the condition that allows these doors to appear, the subtle weaknesses in reality that children can draw on a wall, that remains. The nightmare isn't over. It's just waiting for the next innocent hand to pick up a piece of chalk. Want more stories like this? Follow for more.